So today, we're actually going to have a tag team presentation. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then Roger's going to talk. I'm going to give kind of the 10,000-foot overview of what we're thinking about for surveillance. And then Roger's going to talk about some real details. He's going to talk about some stuff that's worth hearing. And I'm glad that Lindsay opened this concept of surveillance. It's really critical to our entire industry. And I agree with her completely that we need we need more than one kind of approach. In the same way it's nice to have a left hand and a right hand, as long as you coordinate them, the same way we can do with surveillance. And so this group needs to know about surveillance because we're primarily basic researchers. But our bread and butter is having pigs out there in the farms. And so we need to also know about what we're doing here. At the end of the day, we need data. This is a very important lesson for us. This is the 2009 pandemic H1 outbreak. And if you can see the face of these people who think they're going to be killed by the pigs, and if you can see this view of the famous El Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, this is in fact a real game, Mexico against, I think it was Peru, but I could be wrong on that. This stadium holds 95,500 people. There's basically the players playing the game on the field, and this one guy sitting in stands. My only question here is, he's got every seat in the house to choose from, and he's in the nosebleed section. I don't understand. And so at the end of the day, we need data. We need testing data. We need to know exactly what's going on in the pigs. So that applied for the influenza outbreak in 2009. It applied to the latest emergency disease we're looking at, which is Seneca virus. In this case, this is a slide that I borrowed from Dr. Pablo Piñero. And the problem we're seeing here is that we have PCR positives from quite a high number of clinically normal animals. That was on sows. This is on piglets, clinically normal animals that are PCR positive. We have to be in a position that we can deal with subclinical or aclinical animals. Of course, the issue is how do you make it work? And by work, I really mean fast, accurate, affordable, and practical. So it's been a long-held concept, and I agree with it completely. To make this happen, we have to have a federal, state, and industry partnership. And by industry partnership, I mean pig producers, but also vaccine companies and diagnostic companies. Industry is broader than just the pigs themselves. This partnership, this collaboration has got to be in place. There's been a series of reports from the Government Accounting Office, which is a apolitical, detached organization that's supposed to be evaluating problems. There's been a series of reports from them since the late 90s talking about biosurveillance. And in every case, they say biosurveillance is not working. This is from their latest report in July 8th of this year. And to paraphrase what they say, resources that constitute a national biosurveillance capability are largely owned by non-federal entities, which goes back to here. Strengthen and leverage non-federal partners to build and maintain national biosurveillance capability. This is a different model than the one we're following now, and will require some changes. So really the question is how to make surveillance work in a federal, state, industry partnership. Again, fast, accurate, affordable, and practical. So here's George Washington Carver, who is, of course, famous for his research on plants, highly productive, and, by the way, has a master's degree from Iowa State University before he went back to Tuskegee. And his common sense advice is start where you are with what you have. Start where you are with what you have. Great advice. Well, here's where we're starting, and what do we have? Let's see if my animations work. Here we are. What we have is we have a system where we have veterinarians in the field, experts in the field, people who know where the pigs are, people who know what diseases are. These guys and gals they know how to collect samples, they know how to submit these diagnostic samples to the VDLs, and they know how to, once they're in the VDLs, we know how to get those results back to them. This system has really developed on its own in response to demands from the field and under economic constraints. There's nothing in this system that's excessive because there was never excessive money. So this is a system that's practical and works. So anticipate the need for testing capacity. And by that I mean when there is a real emergency, we're going to have to test lots of samples. For example, during the latter part of the Ojewski's disease pseudorabies eradication program, at Iowa State we were testing between 1 and 2 million samples every year. Those are individual pig serum samples, but it was 1 to 2 million samples every year. That translates to between 5,000 and 10,000 tests every day. That's a big testing capability. These labs can handle that testing capability. These are some numbers that I pulled off the web. These are not recent numbers. This is federal year 2012 for the University of Minnesota. They ran about 1.4 million tests. South Dakota, again, just off the web, federal year 2013, 400,000 tests. And Iowa State, 2013, about 1.1 million tests. These are laboratories that know how to handle lots of samples. They can get those results electronic, and they can get them back to the producers. They do that by web-reported results and by emails. They're moving data very fast. What is evolving now is this concept of a shared database. This is not a conspiracy. This is a shared database between these diagnostic labs. And the simple reason for that is because then these folks can tap into this. Doesn't matter where they submit the samples. Doesn't matter where they submit the samples. They may like the University of Minnesota because they run test X better. They may like another lab because they run test Y better. Ultimately, all their data comes back to the same spot, and they can access it uniformly. The power of this entire concept is the fact that there is the data for any kind of coordinated emergency response. The emergency response teams at the state and federal level can tap into this data. It's huge. You could not build a better system if you tried to on purpose. So, on the farm, we have vets that know the producers, they know the pigs, they know the farms, they know how to collect their samples and deliver the samples to the VDLs quickly. At the VDLs, they know how to receive, process, and test massive numbers of specimens. They do it day after day. And the VDLs know how to manage huge databases and deliver the results to the right people very fast. It's a fabulous system. So if you look at what we have, like George Washington Carver says, look at what we have in hand. In fact, we have an unprecedented opportunity to create a supremely effective surveillance system. This is not to say that there wouldn't be bumps in the road, hurdles, etc. The saying I like is, not the devil's in the details, but God is in the details. The most beautiful parts of anything are the details. We have details to work out here, and I'm just going to touch on a few of them. I love this picture. This picture is collecting samples in the U.S. classical swine fever eradication program. This picture is from about 1970. And what I love about this picture is that it reflects a simpler lifestyle. So here are these guys. There's no PPEs. Nobody's wearing personal protective gear, right? No moon suits. These guys aren't even wearing earplugs. And they're collecting a tonsil biopsy, which they're going to submit for FA tissue testing to see if this pig is infected with classical swine fever. And of course, the other part is these are all federal or state employees. And so you got one guy to hold the tube. You got one guy to hold the pig. You got another guy that's going to collect the sample, and you got the supervisor. It's a beautiful thing. I love this. It warms my heart. And of course, these guys obviously aren't real well trained. This guy's holding the pig by his ears. We would be raked over the coals at this point in time, of course. So now, who's going to collect the samples? We've got these federally accredited swine specialist vets. Most of these people are members of the American Association of Swine Veterinarians. And so they're going to be collecting test samples as well as others under their supervision. So, federally accredited by the National Veterinary Accreditation Program. There's already some level of accreditation. If we need additional, let's talk about it now. If we need additional standardization of how these guys work, let's talk about it now and get it squared away. What sample will they collect? In the past, we've always collected individual pig samples, and it could have been the tonsil biopsies like we did in classical swine fever. It can be individual serum samples like we did in Jeski's, the pseudorabies eradication program. We need to select whatever specimen is most fit for the purpose. So that means we have to clarify our purpose. Is it for screening? If we're screening herds, by far the most effective sample for detection is oral fluids. Is it confirmation or follow-up? Once we have something that shows a danger, we can go in for ring testing using individual pig samples. Is it a pre-movement? Remember, we're trying to maintain this business continuity in the face of any emergency problem. If it's for pre-movement, we probably want to collect individual pig samples. We can work all these things out. But for sure, for screening, oral fluids needs to be the basis. This is just some results from our lab. This is from Iowa State. Number of tests run by oral fluids over time. Since 2010, we've run something over 500,000. This last year, we'll have run around 175,000. This is a system that our vets and our producers know very well. They know how to collect the sample. They know how to submit it. It works pretty well. If it didn't work, they wouldn't use it. This approach is being used in other parts of the world as well. In the people I talk to from Asia, they're starting to use it. The Europeans, actually I'm a little bit jealous here, the European Laboratory Network for Oral Fluid Diagnosis in Pigs, ring trial proficiency test on 4 different techniques using field and spiked oral fluids. They have a bunch of laboratories participating, focused on continual test assessment and improvement. It's awesome. The reason, ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason we need to use oral fluids for screening is that they're so much more efficient for detection. And I usually lose people on this slide. If I lose you, I apologize. I'd refer you back to this paper. If you don't have this paper, send me an email and I'll send you the paper. But here's the bottom line. This is some work that came out of this particular manuscript. Using pens of 25 pigs, in every case 25 pigs, if you plant one positive pig, test all 25 to make sure you only got the one positive, your probability of detection using an oral fluid sample is around 15%. If you have 3 positive pigs, your probability of detection using one oral fluid sample by either PCR or ELISA, 45%. 5 positive pigs, 75% probability of detection. 9 positive pigs, that's a 36% prevalence, 95% probability of detection. If you do the calculations, because you know your population size, you know how many positive you have, so you can do the calculations to match this level of detection. To match this level of detection, in this case, you would need to bleed 4 pigs. That would match 15% probability of detection. At this level of detection, you need to bleed 5 pigs, bleed 7 pigs, bleed 8 pigs. It's pretty clear that this one sample does a lot more work with a lot less effort than bleeding pigs. What tests will we run in the lab? We need to be ready to run them, whatever it is, we need to be ready to run them tomorrow. We have the capacity, we have the personnel, but do we have the tests? Right now we don't, especially if you look at foreign animal diseases. Our options are very limited. We have PCRs available in these Nuln labs, because remember, these labs belong to the National Animal Laboratory Network. They're under the federal supervision, Nuln labs, but they have very limited access to the tests they need to be ready to confront a foreign animal disease. Mostly PCRs on selected samples is all they're allowed to do. So, for example, a classical swine fever, they can run PCRs for tonsil scraping, and nasal swabs. This repertoire of tests and the samples that they are allowed to run has got to be expanded if we're going to be ready. Again, this goes back to this federal-state industry partnership. This isn't a problem if these tests, which are currently limited to federal labs, it's not a problem if they are put into these federally supervised labs. USDA can still retain ownership of the tests and of the data, the kits and the results. Whatever tests we're going to be ready to run, they need to be commercial kits, because there is no homemade test that can match the quality of kits that are manufactured under GLP conditions. They've got to be commercial kits. They've got to be ready to run off the shelf. They need to be high throughput tests with extremely robust technology. They have to have a high level of reproducibility and repeatability. Reproducibility means if I test a sample and get a result, my neighbor lab should be able to test that sample and get the same result. Repeatability means if I run that sample tomorrow, I should get the same result that I got today. Reproducibility and repeatability are huge. Also, of course, they have to be accurate and diagnostically specific. The biggest danger in any program are false positives, because you immediately lose the confidence of the people you're trying to help. Specificity is huge. Continual test assessment and improvement. We've had relatively a small amount of work done on our FAD tests. This is an example of what we should be doing. This study was actually sponsored by the National Pork Board, NPB funded, and was run by Dr. Yawalak Panya Singh. Here's Dr. Panya Singh here, a great scientist at Chulalongkorn University. What she's doing here is she's taking pigs infected with ALD strain, classical swine fever virus, and looking at comparison of commercial kits to see which kits actually run the best. And so you can see there are differences. Here's 3 PCRs, and you can see differences in performance by these PCRs over time. Energy capture ELISAs, you can see big differences in performance again. Here's antibody ELISAs. You can see, again, here's our big nemesis, false positives. But again, you can see differences in performance over time. We need this information now, not after we have to confront a problem. We need to be assessing our tests, selecting the best tests, helping, encouraging, pushing our diagnostic companies to produce better tests. So, in my talk, I say we have actually a tremendous system already in place. It needs some tweaking, it needs some improvements, but in fact, there's a lot we can do with what we have. We have an unprecedented opportunity to create what could be a fantastic system. And with that, I'm going to move on and let Rodger take over.
As Jeff said, my part of this talk is really going to be to, after I figure out how to advance the slide, there we go, is to talk a little bit about more about the information and the movement of the information and so on. And this is really the structure of our, as a country, our USDA Veterinary Services National Animal Health Lab Network, and just a pictorial of how data flows to the federal government, the state and federal governments in times of emergency responses, as well as for FAD surveillance. And so what happens is that as Jeff mentioned, we have good systems between our practitioners and our diagnostic labs, and this data going back and forth very quickly between them. And then what happens is that for these program diseases, what we call message those, and Lindsay referred to it earlier in her talk today too about something that's called HL7 messaging, and essentially what that is just a messaging standard. And so regardless of what laboratory the information comes from, it all looks the same, goes into a common database, which is called the Laboratory Messaging Service, and essentially really all that database does is receive these results, and then it pushes it over into something that's called EMERS, which is the state and federal authorities' database system that they use to manage program diseases and program disease events. And we found ourselves have a fair bit of experience this on a routine basis, and probably the biggest application just within the last 12 months is that we found ourselves in the middle of a high-path AI outbreak this spring of 2015. And this is really what that outbreak looked like to us at the laboratory. And essentially what it was basically a 10-week outbreak, and this is just for the state of just Iowa's data, a 10-week outbreak of AI, which resulted into a 4-month sustained response at the laboratory. And at the end of it in Iowa, there was a total of 77 sites affected and a total of 32 million birds that were killed. Essentially about 40% of the layers. Iowa is the #1 egg-laying producer state in the country, and about 40% of those were euthanized in 10 weeks. At the lab, one of the core elements that we learned through this was very similar to things that we learned as we went through the PDV. We need competent personnel, robust systems, validated assays, high-throughput testing platforms, user-friendly and effective sample types, user-friendly at the farm, user-friendly at the lab, pins on diagnostic records, and the ability to message results. And as we kind of step back, as we look back on our role in helping support that response to say what worked and what didn't work, and the singular biggest thing that was an opportunity for us is this issue of the quality information of the record itself, and not necessarily anything about the test result, but the quality and the completeness and consistency in the information, and is it fit. And why is that important? Because when you get into these events, there's an awful lot of people that have to know this information very fast, very real time, and essentially such that everyone understands the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. And so this pictorial just kind of describes that movement of information essentially from our producers here submitting things to the laboratory, and the difference between this is generally historically been coming in some sort of human readable format, meaning somebody's filling out a form, then somebody's here is trying to interpret that form and enter it into a system, and once it gets in here, everything is digital, okay? And like Jeff mentioned today there's emails which are sending human readable forms going back to both the clients as well as the state and federal vets, but then this is how it gets into their system to work with, and this is digital, okay? And I'll get into the importance of that here in a minute. And going through this and through our previous experiences, our observations at the lab that these manually human readable formats for manually entering premise level identifiers, they're really not fit for our current way that we handle information digitally. And for sure, one thing at the lab we could say is we know this doesn't work. What this is for those that aren't familiar with, these are premises ID numbers, okay? And so it's a federal system. Most all swine premises and livestock premises have these. They're a 7-digit alphanumeric number, and for certain, nobody knows them. They can't remember them, and they're really impossible to transcribe in mass. And so as we've kind of worked through that, the things that we find that really work is to essentially transform to a barcode type technology. And kind of our conclusion has been is if you can either scan it or click on it, it works. And if you can't do one of those two things, it doesn't. And so that's where locally we've put a lot of emphasis on really transforming the front end transforming the front end of the diagnostic process, essentially from getting away from a human readable format to transforming our systems to be digital from the time it comes to the submitter into the lab. So less of this and more of that. And we're doing that in two different ways. One is via a web submission, and one is through a barcode system that our clients will put on the submission forms. And the other key lesson of this is that we go to a lot of drills and things like this, and those are great for learning and everything, but when you get into these events, for certain, real life is not a drill. And in the end of the day, our stakeholders, what they expect of us and our diagnostic systems is they expect competent people, competent infrastructure, quality assays, quality test results, fast turnaround time, meaning same day, next day, and cost-effective service, and to get the results out quickly, and such that we can help play a role of helping protect and sustain their business. And all of these are are consistent with the mission of our local labs as well as our role in the National Animal Health Lab Network. And the only way that I think via our experiences that we would know to do that is to do what we do every day. And that is provide a quality service to our clients in which we are directly serving the practitioners that we serve. And this is a wheel that goes round and around every day. And so our thoughts is for this to work as a country, there's probably opportunities to make sure that this is in place for private sector applications. And so one example of that is something that we've been working on for the past 2 years with a lot of collaborative partners. And essentially you may notice, and I don't know if I can go back, but that this pictorial looks very similar to the national program, right? But this is something for private sector applications. Again, same kind of thing. Labs are doing what they're doing, working with their clients, coming in, going out, but within the opportunity to message this data to a central database and then push it over to some of these more advanced spatial temporal disease applications like Bioportal, and we'll talk about this. So we've been going through this process, a highly collaborative journey with pilot project participants, some IT companies, and support has been tremendous, our peer VDLs, and some support from the Pork Board. And the objective of this is really simply to develop a system that links submissions and corresponding test results and attending veterinarian insight to an interpreted health status of farm sites into 2 highly capable spatial temporal disease management tools for use in area regional control, veterinary clinic, or production system specific projects. And really the desired outcome of this is to provide a user-friendly system for monitoring the health status of swine herds over time. And the approach has been, we've kind of been working at all ends of this, from between the labs and the clients, developing systems to receive it here in the middle and interpret it, and then systems to be able to report that. And so the front end of that process has really been working to get our diagnostic data really fit for the digital era. And that goes back to this bit about PINs and transitioning from human readable formats to barcodes as web submissions. And so both of these options result in an electronic transfer of a full complement of information that's needed to make them consistent and repeatable. The work we've been doing in the middle, most of this work, the development of this has been done at Iowa State, is that as creating a database to receive and interpret the data and assign health status and classifications and maintain those to sites, and then essentially push those to third-party diagnostic database applications such as Bioportal. And then on the back end of that, we've been working closely with the group from Davis, colleagues from Boehringer Ingelheim, to develop this disease Bioportal for what I would call producer-centric applications. Okay? And along the way, we've looked for synergistic collaborators, such as this LabLink HIMSS, which is a producer-centric or practitioner-centric system that aggregates diagnostic data from labs for centralized reporting. And so through a partnership with them that we've developed the ability to pull the data from the labs through HIMSS into SAD for interpretation and storing and pushing over to Bioportal for display. A lot of progress has been made on putting this a network like this through an awful lot of good collaborators. For certain, none of the parties involved could do it by themselves by any stretch of the imagination, and hopefully it's going to help play a role to helping putting applications for this data connectivity into the hands of individual producers and systems that can be used every day. And so our kind of next steps with that is in 2016 is to begin to offer this essentially as a bureau where permission clients would be able to view their data in Bioportal, these user-specific dashboards, as well as in SAD, which is the database that's in the middle of it, and where we would have account managers that work with those individual clients. So in summary, I would say that Jeff really, I think, gave a good summary of a lot of the risks and gaps and opportunities that we have to improve our systems of surveillance. They're going to need to be public-private partnerships, And there's definitely a lot of opportunity to address the obvious. And one of the most obvious things is our lack of these FAD assays in these non-labs, and we got to get them in the labs and in ready sample types that we use every day that are known to be effective and so on. As it relates to emergency preparedness, I think my only experience with that would say your only emergency preparedness is what you do every day and your systems that you can use every day, because there's really not time to figure those out in the heat of battle, so to speak, and that we're making some progress on some new tools for private sector applications. And as Lindsay mentioned earlier too, it really feels like we're in the early stage of a dawn of a new era for this animal health information management.